Hi, and welcome to part 5 of making scientific figures with Adobe Illustrator. In this part, I'll be talking about workflow, specifically my workflow that I use when I make scientific figures. So we'll go over creating and using journal templates, importing data, and then I'll give an example of how I create a figure. So first, let me show you a template that I use. So let's go to New from Template. And so this is an example template. Notice that when I created this new document, it created a new untitled Illustrator file. And what I have saved here are all the information I need to create a new figure. For this example, it's for the nature family of journals. So this is really useful. It speeds up my workflow because I don't have to recreate um, all of these boxes with the correct sizes. And so what I have saved here are the sizes of the different columns. And all this information comes from the journal itself. So what I also have saved here is text on a different layer with the instructions telling me what is the maximum sizes for the columns, the types of fonts, the sizes of the fonts, the color format for the document, and then links, and I've put these links in here myself if I ever want to go back and see is there any new information or if is there other information that I forgot to include in this template. Now another nice thing about using templates, as I've mentioned before, is you can save certain things in swatches. So for this particular template, I've saved some lattice files. I might have some graphic styles here saved as well. So let me describe a little bit further what goes into this template. So I've made the artboard for 8.5 by 11 printing. You can change that. You can make this A4 size if you wanted to. Now, I like to use this size artboard because I want to see what my figure will look like when it's printed. So this template is really for figures meant for publication. And so even though all of us mostly read our papers on our laptops or on our phones now, it's still always good to check what is this figure going to look like when I print it. Is everything visible? Are the fonts too small? So it's always useful to make your artboard the actual size of a printed page and to make your columns with the correct sizes. So notice that if I click on this single column, 89 millimeters wide, that's the same size here. And so that I know this will really help me to minimize the amount of wasted white space and for me to really maximize my figure real estate to get my ideas across in the paper. So if you're going to make a new template for any other journal that you wanted to do, you can start with an empty Illustrator file, fill it with the sizes of the columns for that specific journal. What you then do, so let me point this out. All the sizes of these fonts are already set to the default for this family of journals. So it saves a lot of time of also the default for this specific document. I've already saved it so that the default is Arial for this nature family. So if you ever want to look at other properties, you can go to File, Document Setup. And so here for this document, since nature family is based in Europe, I believe in the UK, you can set the units here to millimeters. You can edit the artboards. And different journals have different requirements for their color mode. And to see the color mode, you also go to File and Document Color Mode. And here it's set to RGB because for the nature family, RGB is preferred. So some other elements of this template are the layers. So I tend to keep the instructions on one layer, the bottom layer, and I keep it locked. And so let me now discuss layers. So layers are one way to organize all the features in a document. So a useful thing to do is to lock this layer. So once you click on this empty spot here, you see a lock sign. And what that means is that I can no longer click on certain aspects. So all of these features that you see in red are aspects from the instructions, so I can't click on them. So this is good so that you don't accidentally edit them or change them in any way. Now, when you don't want to see them, you just click on this eyeball here. And so another aspect that I want to talk about is the artboard itself. So this is one artboard here. You can create a duplicate artboard, and sometimes this is useful for making different versions of your of your um, of your figure. So if you go to Shift O, so a quick thing I want to mention is that besides using Shift O, if you want to use the art tool, the artboard tool, it's down here. It's this picture of a sheet with a crosshair on it. Okay, this takes you into artboard mode, artboard editing mode, and you can do certain things just as if this was any other type of object. So if you hold down now Alt, you can duplicate your artboard. And I've duplicated something that was hidden, so let's unlock it. Let's delete. Let's go back into this mode. Let's unlock this. Hold down Alt, click and drag, and now we have two. So these are two different artboards, but notice that the layers still have their same meaning, which is actually really useful. So if I click unlock here, all of these features here are on the same type of layer. So this is one good way sometimes to, if you make a figure, let's say the colors are slightly different. You'd like to look at them side by side. And when you print these out, when it asks you to print, these will be printed out as two different sheets. So this is one good way to make several versions of your figures and to look at them side by side. Okay, let's start with just one artboard for now. Now, suppose you have your template that you've made, your custom template for whatever journal you want to submit to, and you want to save it for later. What you would do then is to go File, Save as Template. And when you do that, it'll save it as a .ait file. And you would put that here with the rest of the default templates that are part of Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so let me show you my workflow for creating a figure. So I want to make for this example, a one column figure. What I would do is I've opened up my template. I'll just delete these other parts of the figure that I don't need, since I've decided for this figure to make a single column figure. Let me drag this size out. I don't know exactly how long it'll be, but I can edit that later. And what I'll do is make a new layer on top of these figure boxes. So that new layer is Command L, this empty layer here, and I'll just call this figure 1A, and then I'll lock the figure boxes. This is so that as I create things and fill them into this, as I create this figure, that I don't accidentally change the sizes of my box. So this is a rigid wall that'll tell me this is the maximum size of the artwork that I'll use. So we're going to import some example data that was made in MATLAB. So to import the data, it's an EPS file. You can use Command Shift P for place. And when I highlight this data set, notice that there's options here, and I'll talk about them shortly. There's a decision here that has to be made in terms of your own workflow. You can choose to link the data or embed it. So I'll show what happens when you first link the data. So let's link it, and now place. And notice that when I exported the data from MATLAB or any other program that you're analyzing your data from, I made sure to export it with the correct size dimensions for the single column and the correct size font, which for Nature Family happens to be set to 7, and that it's Arial. I think Arial or Helvetica is fine for Nature Family. So notice that this figure can be scaled in any way, but it's not editable. I can't click in and change it in any way. In terms of workflow, I would suggest to use this in the beginning while you're still, preparing your figures in the early stages before publication. The reason being is that this figure here is now linked to the actual file, and it's telling you up here that it's linked to this file. So if you happen to replot this data in MATLAB and this file gets rewritten, it'll automatically update within Illustrator. Why is this helpful? So suppose you embed this file so that it's now here. You go back and you have to reanalyze your data and this figure changes. It gets pretty tedious to keep having to do all the same changes over and over again. So I would say just before, unless you're right about to publish, I would say it's probably best to have these files linked. So suppose you replot the data, so you overwrite the name of this file. You would just go back to here. You can go to link, edit the original, relink, or update the link. So if the file gets updated, you just click update link, and any changes here, suppose you replotted this with a different temperature scale, or you didn't have these insets here. So that's one, I would say, one good way to have your workflow in the very beginning, just before publication. So what's the difference between this and embed? Notice that when I choose to embed the file, all of these features are now editable. You can now click on them. So why this would come up sometimes is that the fonts can be wrong, or the wrong shape, or the wrong size. And that's actually a common thing, to go back and make sure all of these fonts are the correct size and are the correct style for the journal. One quick way to do that, so if I click here and I double click and I'm looking to see what is the size and type of this font, it says that it's Helvetica and it's size 7. So suppose I wanted to change all the fonts in this layer, in this figure. What you can do is go to type. This is something that actually comes up pretty often. We go to find font. You highlight Helvetica. So it found Helvetica, and now we want to change it. We're going to replace with the font from. Here we're going to use our system, and we can choose any font here. Let's just use Arial as an example. So now we're going to change all. And notice all the fonts in the image now changed. So that's one very quick way to change them all at the same time. So if I go back to character, notice that it's Arial and it's all the same, and it's all the correct size. So that's one really quick way, as opposed to going in, clicking each one of these features and changing the font size. Okay, so that's importing data. So I'll just show you now an example of what my workflow would go like. So let's say that's figure 1A. What I would do then is do Command L to create a new layer. Let's say I would call this fig 1B. Now I would, before locking, I would make a copy. I want to make a copy of this letter file, and that's on the figure box. Actually, let's drag figure box all the way to the top. So now figure box is the layer that's most on top of everything else. This is useful so that when this box is up here, we know that A is on top of everything else. I should point out that the way that you can tell what layers things are on are by the highlight color. So notice that these features are all in green. So figure 1A is green. That's what this feature means here. When I highlight A, it's blue because that's the color index for blue. If you ever want to change the color index, you just double click. Oops. There we go. We want to change that color. Suppose we want to make it something else. We can make this green. And now this topmost color index is green, but I don't want to confuse it with something else, so we'll make it black. Okay, so black is now for this layer, and now we'll lock it. Let's not lock it first. Let's copy this A. This A was part of the journal template, so I saved already the fonts, and so for this document, the default font is Arial. So I'll drag down this A. I'll make it a B. Let's zoom in. This is part B. Now I'll lock this layer and I'll lock the figure boxes. And now I'll only edit figure 1B. So suppose I was to create a figure down here. So now we can start to put together a figure and give you an example of how I would do it. So I will use, I'll make something, it's not related to anything here, it's just an example of a figure that I've made in the past. So we can make a 3D figure. I'll make an example of a device. So I'm gonna start out, I use the rectangle tool to make a square. And let's duplicate this on top. So this will be my silicon oxide. I'll make another duplicate. So I'm using Alt to make that duplicate. I'll make another duplicate of this layer, and this will be my gold contact pad. Make this yellow. Maybe I'll make this corner rounded. Okay. Now what I want to do is extrude all of this. I want to make a 3D schematic of a device. Since I want all of these features to be rotated at the correct angle and extrude at the same depth, I'm going to group them together first. So these are all now grouped. So when I click, it highlights all of them. Going to go to Effect, Extrude and Bevel. Now I can see an example of what this feature looks like. So I'm going to extrude further this depth. That looks good. Let me change the light source. Yeah, that's much nicer. Maybe I'll make the ambient light a little darker. Light intensity more. Okay. So that's one layer on figure 1B. Now what I'd like to do is put a device on top of it. So off to the side, so not in the figure box. Let's just create a like we've done in the previous lessons. Just do a fake schematic of graphene. And so in this figure template, I've saved some previous lattices. So yeah, let's put in this one. Again, let's scale, transform scale. And let's change only the pattern. And let's make it this big. That's good. Okay. Let's give this a border. Okay. And remember that trick that if we want to write this feature onto the, to map this feature onto the 3D schematic, we have to drag to our symbols table. So click and drag. We have our new symbol. So now we can delete this one. Let's go back to this feature, go to Appearance, click on Extrude and Bevel. So now we want to map artwork onto this device. So this is so many features stacked on top of each other that it might take a while to find the correct surface. So what I'm looking at is what is the highlighted face in red. Yep, that's the top one. So let's choose our symbol. And there goes the schematic device. I'll just shrink it. Drag it to the correct edge. And that looks good. Okay, Now maybe let's move this a little bit down. Okay, so this is a schematic of a, some sort of 2D material device. What I'd like to put is a cartoon of an STM tip on top. Since I want that tip to be in front of everything, what I'm going to do is go to layers. Just because I want to see this panel, I'm going to hit Command L again to make another layer. So this layer, I want it to be only on top of this figure. So I'll call this figure 1B, let's say tip. So it's still part of figure 1B, but it's some other thing on top. And what I'll do then is lock figure 1B so that I don't accidentally ruin this object. So if I wanted to make a fake tip, so now we're combining everything that we've learned. I'm going to use P for the pen tool. Let's choose the color we want to use. I'll do gray and an empty fill. So let's make a tip like so. That's good. I'll make it a bit fancier so that we can use some of, really combine all the things that we've learned. So I'm going to use Shift C to give this tip some curvature like that. And I want a rounded edge, so I'll grab this handle and make sure it's flat, like that. So this looks like a good tip. So I'll take this feature, and what I want to do is revolve it. So I'm going to Effect, 3D, Revolve. And there goes the rotated tip. And do I like this lighting? Sure, this lighting is fine. Since this is a revolved feature, I want to increase the blend steps to 100. And let's see what that looks like. Yep, that's much smoother. Let's go OK. Let's zoom out to look at the, does this look fine? I can click and drag. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, now one thing that you also might want to do, now we're getting to just style. So now we're just playing with what looks nice. So just an example, if you've seen this in other figures, is that there's some sort of 2D outline on all of your things. There are certain ways to do that by expanding the appearance on all these features and then adding borders. I tend to not like that. One much quicker way to do it is to just use the pen tool. So I'm going to create another layer, again, on top of everything. And let's call this figure 1B border. So I'll lock that layer, and I'm only working with this layer here. So if I can go to pen tool, fill it with black. Let's use a stroke of maybe 1.5. Let's see what this looks like. And so what I just want to do is just outline the device. And so notice that I have this on fill. So let's just flip this. So let's make this empty. There we go. Notice that this is much faster than if I had actually, let's close it here. So actually, I'm gonna make a separate border around the tip. So I'll join these two parts. So that'll be a border for the device, and then I'll make a border separately for the tip. So let's do around the tip. Let's go here. Shift C, I'll give it some curvature like that. Okay. Now, one thing that I hadn't shown before was how to duplicate things. So if I just duplicate this, it'll make a copy of this side. If I want to flip this thing, you can go over here to this panel, the rotate tool or the reflect tool. So it's O. So we just hit O. Now if I click and drag my feature, it'll flip it horizontally. So now I can drag it, place it there. Now if I go back to the pen tool, I can close these two objects. Okay. But now that I decided to make this border, notice that there's certain things that are in front and things that are in back. And so if I just unlock the tip, what I want to do is take this revolve feature and cut it, go to the border page and do Command-Shift-V. So that'll paste it exactly at that point. So Illustrator has this funny thing that if you do Command-Paste, it does it anywhere. But if you do Command-Shift-V, it pastes here. So if you go to Edit, Paste in Place, Command-Shift-V, paste it exactly where you had copied it from. So we can send this all the way to the back there. Send this to the front. Okay, so now if we lock both, so now we have this figure, and the black border there is just for, just makes it a little bit nice to look at. We can go back and change this rounded edge here. So I used A, the direct select tool. Then I'll just curve this edge like so. Lock. And so this is our one column figure. I haven't filled in, any other things, but you can see that the point of using the figure template is to really make sure that you're maximizing your figure real estate. You don't want any empty spaces. Suppose here we can have a cartoon of the symbol that we used. So I can take the symbol, drag it back down. Oh, everything is locked right now. So this is one really good tip, is to, if you hold down Alt or Option and you click lock, it unlocks all of them. So this is actually really useful sometimes, and it works the same for the eyeballs. So suppose I want to lock everything but this layer. I hit Alt and click, and it locks all the layers but that one. So I want to unlock actually this layer. So I'm gonna lock all of them but that one. I'm going to go to Symbol. Which layer am I working with? Oh, remember that the layer that you want to edit always has to be highlighted. Click and drop. Maybe we put this here. No, just to give you an example. So you can see that the power of using figure templates is to really just help you plan and make sure that when you're publishing a paper, that you don't have too much white space, that it helps you organize your thoughts and all of your ideas to make sure that you have a cohesive story to the figure that you're working on. So thanks everyone for watching. This is the last, at least in this part. In the future, I'll show more tutorials on how to use Blender for making cover artwork, and I'll continue to publish small videos on tips and tricks, further tips and tricks on for making figures for publication. Thanks for watching.